Hey guys, June here, and in this video we're going to take a really in-depth and complete look at bomb tanking. We're going to cover everything from gearing all the way through each individual phase, including some ability by ability rotations for specific phases where DPS is important. This should give you everything that you need to improve your bomb tanking skills, whether you're a complete beginner who's just looking for a guide to get started and learn how to do your first few kills, or if you've been doing bomb tanking for a while but maybe you just want to optimize your rotations a little more or try some more advanced strategies. So with all that said, let's get started by taking a look at how we're going to gear up. There are two common ways to gear up. On the far right you see the classic setup of using Void. This is slightly inferior to the DPS output of Augmented Power Armor, but is still a viable choice, especially if your objective with Rago is to make money, since the upkeep cost of augmented gear is quite high. If you decide to go with Augmented Tier 80 or Tier 90 Power Armor, assuming Jagex ever implements a way to augment Tier 90 Degrade to Dust armors, you'll probably want to perk it out in the same way that I discussed in my guide to optimizing invention perks. The only exception is you'll definitely not want to have any tier of the Lucky perk on your armor when bomb tanking at Virago. Lucky can actually get you into a lot of trouble because when you try and resonance a blue bomb, it will occasionally reduce that damage dealt to 1, which means you don't get your res and the huge amount of health that you would have accumulated from that. This will either get you killed outright or cause you to use a whole lot more food than you normally would because you lost out on your healing. The Amulet of Souls is another core part of gearing because both the extra damage reduction with Deflect Prayers as well as the enhanced Soul Split are both going to be a vital part of healing and reducing our damage taken as the tank. Bomb tanking can be done effectively with either a staff or with dual wield magic, however dual wield magic is considerably less effort, though staff is on average about 1% stronger DPS. Choosing an aura for bomb tanking should generally be DPS oriented, though I definitely wouldn't recommend a bomb tank use Maniacal, at least until they have quite a bit of experience in doing no food kills. For a pocket slot item, the ideal thing here is actually God Books because they contribute to pushback on Phase 5. Second to that would be a Scrimshaw of Magic, and then lastly would be a Scrimshaw of Elements. In your inventory you want your Excalibur as well as an Arcane, ideally perked out with Turtling 3. This perk comes in amazingly handy on Phase 5. The rest of your inventory orientation is going to mostly depend on how many kills per trip you intend to do. Most teams do either 2 or 4 kill trips, so you'll want your Overloads, Adrenaline Flasks, and Phoenix Necklaces for however many kills you intend to do. On average you should expect to use at most about 3 doses of Overload and Adrenaline per kill. The Phoenix Necklace is only for the drop down damage, and so you'll only need 1 of those per kill. The rest of your inventory will be Super Restore Flasks and food, and the ratio that you find with these should mostly depend on your skill level. You'll probably have to tweak it a little bit. The amount of Prayer Drain from the Arcane mostly depends on how effective you are at rotating your defensive abilities, so feel free to adjust this and come up with an inventory loadout that suits your skill level. The setup you see here is what I use for 4 kill trips, and it should work for most of you guys. Your familiar should be either an Ice or a Smoke Nihil, though if you're really uncomfortable starting out with that, you can use a Yak while you're learning. Now let's look at layout and some things that it's very important to have easy access to. Keep in mind this is just how I happen to have things set up. If you find that you have something else that's more comfortable for you, feel free to do that as long as you have access to everything that I'm going to talk about. First, I find that it's easiest to just keep my standard magic DPS bar open at all times. Instead of building another bar with the objective of having a tank-specific rotation for magic, I keep my defensive abilities over here on a sidebar. This is more convenient for me because I can get used to the keybinds and also use them alongside any of the other DPS bars if I'm, for example, tanking with ranged instead. For Virago in particular, it's especially important that we have access to Devotion, Debilitate, both Resonance and Preparation, Reflect, and Barricade. Revenge, Rejuvenate, and Immortality are not going to be commonly used, so you don't need to have access to these if you don't have space for it in your layout. Next, we need to make sure that we have access to Provoke, to Freedom, and to Escape for when we do our rotation for the bleeds. Common practice at Virago is for the bomb tank to take bleed 3 and 4. If you have access to Sacrifice, that can be a nice ability to have on a sidebar to get a little bit extra heal anytime that you need it. Transfigure is a nice ability to have access to, specifically to use one time on Phase 2. You want to make sure that you have quick access to switching back and forth between the Soul Split and Deflect Magic Prayer, because being an advanced bomb tank means switching back and forth between these prayers absolutely constantly. It can also be convenient to move your shield and staff or offhand switch onto this bar to make it more easy to access it alongside your prayer switches and other defensive abilities. Lastly, it can be nice to have debuffs on these sidebars. These are generally not very important for 4 or 5 man kills, but if you're doing trio or duo kills, debuffs are a vital part of the strategy. Remember, you don't necessarily need to set up sidebars in this way. You can do, for example, prayer switches from the book or other things, but this is what I find works best for me. Now let's take a look at the basics of Virago's attacks. This is a blue bomb, which is one of Virago's primary basic attacks. Anytime when I'm talking about Virago's attack rotation and I say attack, there's about a 50% chance that it will be a melee swipe at the base tank and a 50% chance that it will be a blue bomb directed at the bomb tank. These hit for up to about 5,000 magic damage and can be blocked in any way by any particular defensive abilities. They also have a splash radius and will share damage with any nearby players. The radius on that splash range is 3 spaces, which you can see an example of on screen now. Anything inside this blue area would be damaged by a blue bomb that is centered on me. This is generally not an issue for the bomb tank. It's usually up to the DPS to make sure that they're not close enough to you to be hit by the splash damage from blue bombs. This is a red bomb, which is the second of the primary attacks that Virago will direct at the bomb tank. These hit for typeless damage, ranging anywhere from 2,000 to 7,000 depending on how many players are standing nearby. They also cancel defensive abilities, and the only defensive ability that will actually block the damage from them is Barricade, though it will still cancel the Barricade effect after it hits. When a red bomb is released, there is also a non-homing blue bomb released on the spot the player is standing when the red is released. The non-homing blue will hit any of the players standing within the normal blue bomb blast radius of the spot where it was released towards. The non-homing blue bomb also always hits before the red bomb does, so if the player has resonance available, they can heal from it, or they can choose to simply move away from it. The damage dealt by the red bomb is influenced, like I said, by how many players are within a specific range, which happens to be 4 game tiles from the player targeted. This means any player standing inside of this gray box would contribute an extra 1,000 damage to a red bomb which was targeting me. Additionally, if there are any players standing inside the yellow box with a radius of 2 squares, they'll suffer the same amount of damage as the bomb tank. These are the 6 abilities that will be cancelled by the red bomb. Remember that Barricade will block the damage before it's cancelled, and this is the most common way to deal with red bomb damage. Transfigure is also not cancelled by a red bomb, which means that you can heal back the HP dealt by the red bomb using Transfigure, which is why we will use it once on Phase 2. The only time we're actually going to use abilities to deal with red bomb damage is on Phases 2 and 4, where DPS is not relevant for the speed of the phase. Using Barricade to block red bombs on Phase 1 and 3, for example, is going to actually extend the kill time, and is a bad habit for bomb tanks to get into. The last interesting mechanic with red bombs is that they actually move slower than blue bombs do, and we can use this to apply a very advanced tactic called two-stepping. Virago always uses red bombs at the same time, so we know ahead of time when they're going to happen, and we can exploit the fact that they move at different speeds from blue bombs to block the blue bomb that comes after a red bomb. Keep in mind this is only useful on Phases 2 and 4, where we're actually going to use Barricade to block the red bomb damage. When the red bomb comes out, we'll step 2 spaces in and use Barricade. Once Virago releases the bomb following the red bomb, we'll run 4 spaces out. This causes the blue bomb to hit us before the red bomb, even though it was released afterwards, and allows it to be blocked by Barricade, since the red bomb effect would clear the Barricade. This technique does require a little bit of practice, though it's not so important that you won't be able to do full no-food kills without it. It is, however, a convenient trick, and it certainly does make you look like much more of a pro bomb tank. Now let's get started with the actual fight and take a look at Phase 1. Obviously this starts with our entire team being geared up and ready at Virago's face, and if you're not familiar with Virago, when the kill starts we're all going to suffer a damage amount shared between players, totaling 50,000 damage in a normal mode kill. 5-man teams are probably most common, meaning every player is going to take a total of 10,000 damage, and if you have 99 HP, all you need to get past this threshold is to Bonfire, which is also convenient because the additional HP is going to come in handy during the fight anyway. If you're doing 4-man teams, you'll need some extra tank armor switches to get past the 12.5k HP threshold. If you're doing 6-mans, you'll only receive 8,333 HP, which is important to know because it won't trigger your Phoenix necklaces on dropdown. With that in mind, if we're able to benefit from a Phoenix necklace, we'll want to equip that now, and we want to start off using either our dual wield or our staff and soul splitting. We also want to use our Excalibur on dropdown, but it's important not to activate the Excalibur until after the damage is hit, or else it prevents your Phoenix necklace from activating. Virago's attack rotation on Phase 1 is very simple. He starts by throwing a red bomb, and then there will be 4 attacks which are a 50-50 chance of being either a blue bomb directed at the bomb tank or a melee swipe directed at the base tank, and that will repeat until Phase 1 is over. Phase 1 is generally considered to be the hardest part of bomb tanking at Virago simply because the sheer number of red bombs cancelling defensive abilities. For those of you who are new to this, it's going to feel very chaotic because we're going to be doing a lot of prayer switching and shield switching back and forth for this. Do your best not to panic, and with repetition and practice you should be able to do this with no food consistently after just a few tries. Once we drop down into the kill, we want to re-equip our Amulet of Souls and run to roughly the center of the arena. Right about in the center of the area is a formation on the ground that people commonly refer to as the L rock, which is visible in any graphic settings. Standing inside this L puts you melee distance with Virago on drop on any phase, and so this is a common reference spot when talking about where to stand on different phases, and as part of this phase we're going to stand just about 1 square southeast of this spot. Once Virago is lured to the northeast by the base tank, our maximum cast distance is going to be 1 space south of the L rock, roughly along this line. We want to stick to this location, and we can move to the left and to the right to avoid the non-homing blues from the different reds that Virago is going to fire at us throughout Phase 1. Additionally, by standing 1 square southeast of the L rock on drop-down, we make sure that the very first red bomb which Virago fires is headed to the top lure. When Virago drops, we'll also want to overload, and to start off with, our first objective is simply to build adrenaline. Continue to soul split and DPS until you get your first blue bomb, at which point you want to swap to your shield and resonance it. If you restored a considerable amount of HP, you can also tank the first and choose to resonance the second instead, and then you'll just continue DPSing and building adrenaline. When the second red comes out, you want to run to the east to avoid the non-homing blue and plan to tank the damage. If there were no blues before this point, however, you can choose to resonance the non-homing blue instead. If you've already used your resonance, make sure you're swapping to deflect from magic when they're hitting you and soul splitting between them. If you're unlucky and getting a very steady stream of blue bombs, you can also switch to your arcane to get the extra 30% damage reduction, or you can use devotion. Once you hit 100% adrenaline, you want to sunshine inside of the L rock and make sure you're switching for your ring of vigor at that point. You can also use an adrenaline potion, and right about then Virago will be throwing out his third red bomb, which you're going to tank. This should also be roughly about the time that the top lure pulls Virago over to the northwest side, and this is your opportunity to get massive amounts of soul split heals and get your heavy damage in with wild magic and asphyxiate inside the sunshine. You'll also have resonance available for a second time about now, so this is a great opportunity to heal again, and you should be roughly max HP once this happens. When the top lure actually jumps on Virago, you can no longer attack him, but he still will occasionally throw out bombs, so that's a good opportunity to swap to your shield and use defensive abilities to block those if you're running low on HP. The top lure usually jumps around 20k HP, and so once this is over, there's very little damage left to be done to Virago, and the phase is basically over. Once Virago dies, he'll do his 3 jumps around the room, and you want to do your best to avoid getting hit by them since they cost unnecessary HP. Make sure you don't use Freedom to stall because that'll be very important at the beginning of the next phase. If you're unlucky and get an additional red bomb, you can either tank it if you have the HP or sip a couple of brew doses if for some reason you're running low. The easiest way to keep track of how effectively you're doing DPS compared with your other teammates is what XP drop you get at the end of the phase. The total experience on Phase 1 without any HP resets is 26,600 HP, and since your top lure is likely not going to contribute much or any DPS depending on the quality and the size of the team, this should be roughly split evenly between the other players remaining. In this case, this was a 5-man team, so I should have expected to get roughly 26,600 divided by 4, which would be 6.6k HP, and I got just shy of 7k. This just about makes sense since we did have someone die towards the end of the phase. That's the end of Phase 1, and Phase 2 is on a timer instead of a DPS phase, so there's no reason to go into it with any adrenaline. We can use Regenerate to reclaim some HP from the adrenaline that we had remaining at the end of the phase, and it's also really not important going into Phase 2 with any particular amount of HP. We could quite reasonably drop down into Phase 2 with 1 HP and recover. Now let's move on and take a look at Phase 2. Remember, like I said in the last video, that it's not important to have any particular amount of HP on this phase, and you don't need to go into the phase with any adrenaline. This is also a timed phase, not a DPS phase, so you can shield camp as much as you want, and if you're running low on prayer potions, you can even turn off your stat boosting prayers. Virago's attack rotation on this phase is also much more complex, but it's also generally easier than the attack rotation on Phase 1. The phase will start off with 5 bleeds right on drop down, and as bomb tank we're responsible for taking the 3rd and 4th. After the bleeds are finished, Virago will use 3 attacks, and then reflect, and a gravity orb will spawn somewhere in the arena. The gravity orbs actually have a specific proximity for which they have to be to Virago in order for him to absorb them, which is part of this phase. When we do our first set of bleeds on drop down, we're going to actually move Virago very slightly to put him into a spot that's commonly called as the base spot, which puts him inside the range of any possible orb spawn locations. After the Reflect, Virago fires 3 attacks, and the Reflect wears off on the 3rd attack, so that's when we can begin attacking again, and then he will fire a red bomb. After firing the red bomb, he will use 4 more attacks before starting his bleeds again. This cycle will repeat until Virago has absorbed 4 of the gravity orbs, at which point we enter the Bring Him Down phase. After the Bring Him Down phase, once we've freed the weapon piece, he will resume this attack rotation, but he's likely to die before he fires off his next red bomb. On drop down, we're going to find the L rock, but we're going to stand 2 spaces south of it. The first bleed actually occurs while Virago is dropping down, so the animation is difficult to see. When we see the animation for the second bleed start, we're going to both provoke and spam click on Virago at the same time. As you can see, this caused Virago to move ever so slightly and put him into the spot that I talked about earlier. The third bleed now will be coming to us, so we're going to freedom from that, and then after that we're going to escape from the fourth bleed, at which point the TL5 is going to evoke and take the fifth bleed. We can soul split all the way through the bleeds, and when the first blue starts coming out, we'll have resonance off cooldown, and that should get us healed up back towards full HP if we're low. When the reflect happens, we can continue to build adrenaline a little bit by using things like storm shards or anticipation. Virago uses a couple of attacks in the reflect, and then he's going to fire a red bomb, and for the first red bomb we're going to barricade. After the red bomb he uses 4 more attacks, and they'll evenly be split between melee swipes and blue bombs, but you could feasibly even tank all 4 blue bombs without using any defensive abilities from max HP. When we see Virago use the first bleed on the base tank, we're going to get MD by using runes on Virago and Voke after the second. After the Voke we have time to use one ability, and then we'll freedom and escape from our 2 bleeds, and the TL5 will take the 5th. Again, if we're low on HP, we can soul split and dual wield for the bleeds, and switch back to our shield when the blues start coming out. For all of these streams of blues, we can do pretty much whatever to mitigate the incoming damage, whether that's use Debilitate, or Reflect, or Devotion. Then we have the next Reflect, and we'll want to make sure that we're at 100% adrenaline so we can use another ult for the red bomb, so we can build with Storm Shards or Preparation. We don't want to use Anticipation to stall, because on this one we're going to use Transfigure, and Transfigure will not activate if you're under the effect of Anticipation. Transfigure will let you tank those hits and then heal you back, and roughly about when it's going to wear off, we're going to start doing the bleeds again. Again, we want to get in melee distance by using our runes on Virago, provoke after the second, freedom the third, and then escape from the fourth. Of course, we can soul split again, try and heal back some of that HP. We'll probably have resonance available for the first blue bomb that comes at this point, and that should get us back up towards max. During this period, we want to focus on building up our adrenaline again, and then when the reflect happens, we can cap off our adrenaline using stall abilities like Storm Shards or Anticipation. 3 attacks after the reflect, Virago is going to fire the red bomb, and this is likely to be the last one that he's going to send us on this phase, and now our barricade is back off cooldown so we can use that. After the red bomb, Virago fires 4 more basic attacks before the last set of bleeds. When they happen, we'll again want to use our runes on Virago to get ourselves into melee distance, and we'll definitely want to soul split this rotation. We'll Voke after the second, use an ability, freedom from the third, and then escape from the fourth. At this point we'll want to try to build back up to 100% again, and do our best to heal with soul split at this point. After the bleeds there are only 3 attacks before the last orb spawns, so if any of them are blues we'll do whatever we can to mitigate that. When the reflect happens and the last orb spawns, someone will tag it and Virago will enter the Bring Me Down phase. If you've been shield camping, you definitely want to put your offhand on at this point, and if you turned off your stat boosting prayers like I suggested at the beginning, you definitely want to turn those back on now. You'll lose a little bit of HP at this point due to the damage over time effect that's occurring while the team's clicking Virago to fill the Bring Him Down bar. After the bar fills, however, you get to attack Virago while he's incapable of retaliating. This is a good time to spam out thresholds and heal a good amount of your HP back using Soul Split. You can also throw in a sacrifice for a little bit of extra healing. When Virago stands back up and you get the message that the weapon piece has been freed, he's likely to die before he throws out any kind of a bomb, but if he throws out a blue bomb you can swap to your shield and resonance that, and that gives you the opportunity to head into Phase 3 with both full adrenaline and full HP. Starting Phase 3 with 100% adrenaline is very important, so we want to make sure that we adrenaline stall. If we aren't at least close to full HP, we can also sip a couple of brew doses to get somewhere up there. Phase 3 is where the fight with Virago starts to change depending on what weekly rotation it is, so let's take a look at each of those different Phase 3s individually. So let's take a look at Phase 3 on the Ceilings week. This is Virago's full attack rotation on this phase, courtesy of the RuneScape wiki. We start off with a Ceiling Collapse and then 3 attacks, which will be blue bombs since it's common for the team not to be in melee distance during this phase, and then he's going to do the Reflect. During the Reflect there are 3 more attacks, and then the Ceiling Collapse again, 3 attacks and a red bomb, 4 attacks, and then that whole cycle repeats. This is one of the most challenging weeks for the bomb tank on Phase 3, both because the ceilings can actually fall on top of the bomb tank if they're not paying attention, and that can deal serious damage and has KO potential, but also because Virago jumping around makes it difficult to do good DPS rotations under some circumstances. You'll see what I mean by that later on in the video. Let's start by taking a look at my preferred rotation. On drop down we're going to run the standard gambit of Asphyxiate, Wild Magic, Concentrated Blast, or Sonic Wave if you're using a staff, and Dragon Breath. This gets us off Virago just in time for the Reflect, at which point we'll want to do a shield switch and resonance from that last blue. After that res we'll want to charge Detonate, and on the third blue in the Reflect we can release the Detonate along with Dragon Breath. Keep in mind placement is important on this phase because of how much Virago's moving around. I actually missed out on my Detonate in that clip because I was 2 spaces outside my max cast distance. After the Reflect we simply want to Devotion and Adrenaline Pot into Onslaught. At this point we should use Excalibur to heal a little bit, and we'll just want to push our Onslaught as long as we feel comfortable. Once we do cancel it, it won't actually take long to finish Virago off with a few basics, and we'll also have Resonance available to heal off one of those last blues. Another common strategy is to do a pretty standard Sunshine rotation by sunning on drop. Personally, I don't like this strategy simply because after Virago jumps, it's completely RNG whether or not he lands in a location that's still within the range of your Sunshine. All in all, this is one of the rare circumstances where it's important to be able to improvise a strategy as the bomb tank. If, for example, you're doing very small team kills, or if for any reason the phase is going particularly slowly, you may need to barricade to clear some of the rocks, as they're going to inhibit the movement of the team and eventually make it impossible to fight Virago. This should generally never be an issue, but keep this kind of thing in mind because the rocks will follow you into Phase 4 and they can block the path to the waterfalls as well. Another option would be to do what we did in our original strategy, but instead of onslaughting after Reflect we could do a Metamorphosis and Adren rotation. All the strategies suffer from the same problems regarding Virago's movement, so which you choose mostly comes down to team size as well as your personal preference. At the beginning of Phase 3 on Scopulus Week we'll want to be standing somewhere along the southern wall, and we'll sun Adren on drop. The only attacks we'll actually be taking on this phase are blue bombs unless for some reason the Scopulus is on us like it is in this clip, and you should essentially just run away until somebody from the DPS vokes it onto them. The need for defensive abilities here mostly comes from how big the team is, but generally you'll want to tank a couple of bombs on drop so that you can get your wild magic off first, and then you can resonance a bomb to get back towards max HP and Devotion. During Devotion, obviously, you can continue using your thresholds in Sunshine and deal pretty good DPS, and if for any reason the team is going really slow, you can get a second resonance off after the Devotion as well as Reflect. Keep in mind for this particular part of the fight that you can't use Debilitate effectively here since you can only attack the Scopulus, and debilitating a Scopulus will not reduce the damage from the blue bombs that you get from Virago. Depending on team size, this phase is probably over long before your Sunshine even runs out. However, if the phase is dragging on, maybe you're taking Learners or something for example, and you're just taking tons and tons of damage because the Scops are living forever, you can use things like Barricade and Immortality to deal with the incoming damage as well. This of course should be a very rare scenario, and so you can generally get by with 1 or 2 resonances and a Devotion alongside your standard DPS rotation from Sunshine. Now let's take a look at the Vitalis Phase 3. I'm actually going to talk about 2 different rotations for this Phase 3, and both are perfectly acceptable. One is a clear outstander in DPS but is more dangerous, where we'll be using Onslaught, and the other is a simple Sunshine rotation. There are also bleeds on Phase 3 of this week, and as part of our strategy we'll be taking bleed 1 and 2, unlike most of the other times where we're taking bleeds. Because of that we want to make sure we don't stall with Freedom, and like the other Phase 3s it's important to come in with as much HP as possible as well as full Adrenaline. At the start of the phase we want to head toward the south end of the arena, and we'll use our Excalibur to get a little bit of passive heal on this phase. When Virago drops down we'll Wild Magic, and then we're going to Voke him onto us, and then we'll use Asphyxiate. The first 2 blues will come out and we'll use Deep Breath to cancel Asphyxiate, and then quickly swap to our shield and res the third blue. This is when the Reflect occurs, so we're going to swap back to our offhand, we'll use Devotion and Adrenaline Pot, and when the third blue is fired within the Reflect, we'll Onslaught. There's then 3 blues before the bleed, so we'll tank the first 2, and then when we see the third one fired we're going to spam click into the L rock to run MD and use Freedom to clear the first. Then we'll use Escape to clear the second and swap to our shield. Resonance is going to come off cooldown exactly the same tick that the blue bomb fired after the second bleed is going to hit us, so we'll heal from that, and then we will swap back to our offhand and finish off Virago. Now let's look at the weaker but easier Sun rotation. We'll Sun Adren just before Virago drops down, and then we'll tag him with Deep Breath and we'll Voke. After the Voke we'll build and try to get a Wild Magic off, and just like with the Onslaught rotation we're going to tank the first 2 blues and we're going to Resonance the third. On the Reflect we're also going to Devotion, and then we can also use Detonate. I didn't use it in this clip because I actually screwed up and switched back from my Ring of Vigor prematurely and didn't get that extra 10% Adrenaline save. After the reflect, we're going to asphyxiate, we'll build with a couple of basics and get a second wild magic in, and just like the onslaught method, once we see the third blue has been fired, we're going to run MD so that we can freedom from the first bleed, escape from the second, and in this particular clip, Virago died before throwing out the blue bomb, but we would have had resonance available on tick just like with the onslaught method. For those of you who are curious, this is the full attack rotation on this phase, courtesy of the RuneScape wiki. In general though, it's difficult for Virago to make his way through a full rotation on this phase just because the DPS is so easy to do. Now let's take a look at phase 3 on Green Bomb week. The phase starts off with a green bomb, and then there are 5 attacks, and then a reflect, though the 5 attacks are skipped directly to reflect if the green bomb hits a 10k hit on any player. After the reflect are 3 attacks, then Virago fires another green bomb, at which point there are 5 more attacks, though those are also skipped if the green bomb is tanked. Then there's a red bomb, and 4 attacks, and then the whole cycle repeats. This phase is also relatively easy to DPS, so depending on the quality of our team, we should expect to get it before reflect depending on some strategies, or shortly thereafter. The first and best strategy here, as long as your entire team is competent, is simply to Devotion, Adrenaline Pot, and Onslaught. If the green bomb happens to be on you, there should be a dedicated person on the team who's going to come and pull it off you and bring it back to the DPS pile. As long as all players onslaught effectively, you should be able to get Virago before the reflect, and then you can do your shield switch and resonance the last blue, though I screwed that up in this video because I had used resonance to stall adrenaline on dropping into the phase. A slight variation to this strategy for teams that are a little bit weaker is to use Wild Magic, then Dragon Breath, then Devotion and Adren Pot to onslaught. This change allows the timer on Devotion to block more of the blue bombs, however it does reduce your outgoing DPS a little bit at the start. Because of that, the former method is much more preferable if the team's able to get it before reflect, but this is a good option if your team is a little bit slower or if you have learners. Now let's take a look at phase 3 on TeamSplit week. This is Virago's full attack rotation on that phase, courtesy of the RuneScape wiki. On drop down there's a team split followed by 3 blues, at which point Virago does the reflect, and then 3 more blues before doing another team split. After that second team split there will be 3 more blues followed by a red bomb, 4 more blues, and then that whole cycle repeats until Virago has been killed. There's really only one effective rotation on TeamSplit week, and so that's all we're going to talk about. Obviously first step on drop down is going to be to find and get inside of our team split. Out of that team split, we're going to want to Wild Magic, Asphyxiate, Concentrated Blast, and Dragon Breath, which gets us off just in time for the reflect. If HP is a concern, you can replace Concentrated Blast with Sacrifice instead to restore a little bit of HP at the cost of a little bit of damage. Once the reflect actually goes off, you're going to want to swap to your shield so you can resonance one of the first blue bombs and charge detonate. Once a bomb has actually procced your res, you can swap back to an offhand and you can release the detonate along with Dragon Breath on that third blue bomb. At this point we'll need to make our way to the second team split, and we can use a couple of brew doses to get towards max HP and also our enhanced Excalibur special to passively heal us over time. Out of the second team split we're going to want to Wild Magic and Dragon Breath followed by Devotion and then Adrenaline Pot into Onslaught. The Devotion will protect you from all the blue bombs, including the non-homing blue from the red bomb, up until the red bomb actually hits you, but you'll also be taking damage from Onslaught itself. Push it as long as you feel comfortable, and then you can Rocktail Brew back up to a safe HP. On standard team sizes, this should more than take care of Virago before the third team split, but for very small teams, or maybe if you're taking learners, there's a good chance that you will have a third team split. Since you finished off the last team split round with Onslaught, you're not likely to have much for Adrenaline, so you're going to have to make it into the team split, but you will have Resonance available out of that team split, which should get you back towards max HP and put you in a safe place to improvise for the rest of the phase. It's also a common strategy for the base tank to walk Virago before the third team split if DPS is going particularly slow. With all that said, as long as you don't push your Onslaught so hard that you kill yourself, you shouldn't run into too many issues with this phase, and in my opinion, it's one of the easiest phase 3s. Now let's take a look at the last phase 3 rotation, which is Purple Bomb. Here is Virago's full attack rotation on that phase, courtesy of the RuneScape wiki. It starts off with a full cycle of the end Purple Bomb special attack thing, followed by 3 attacks, a reflect, and 3 attacks, and then he does the special attack cycle again. 3 attacks, a red bomb, 4 attacks, and that repeats. Because of how the special attack works on this phase and the DPS strategy, you should be able to get it before the reflect with a 5-man team pretty much every time. If for some reason the team doesn't get it before reflect, it's also common practice for the base tank to walk Virago so that you can continue to DPS it after the reflect ends before it goes back and does the Purple Bomb special again. If there is a second Purple Bomb special, you're also given that nice long stretch of not being under attack to build Adrenaline and set yourself up to improvise a new strategy for the remainder of the phase. As usual with Phase 3s, we go in with 100% adrenaline and we get inside Virago's arms when he starts the special attack. In this first quadrant, we'll run a standard gambit of Asphyxiate, Wild Magic, and Dragon Breath. As Virago's arms move into the other quadrants, our focus is going to be on building and then escaping from Virago's arms. There are 2 spots in the cycle where this can be done, when Virago's arm closes onto the southern or the eastern location. All you really need to do this is to stand on the center of the location where the arm will end up being when Virago's arm closes on this spot, and then run either west or south out of it, depending on which of the 2 spots that it landed on. Once we've actually escaped from Virago's arms, we'll position ourselves at a bomb tanking spot, which will be a little bit farther out than inevitably is standing in this clip because he's actually just the DPS. We will stun Adren and continue building adrenaline with basics until we get past 80% adrenaline. At that point we want to charge Detonate and release Detonate along with Asphyxiate, Wild Magic, and Dragon Breath when Virago stands up and the damage reduction effect is released. This is also when the barrage of bombs occurs, and as the bomb tank we're going to take up to 6 different bombs before the reflect. We get 1 of each bomb as part of the special attack itself, and then 3 more potential blues before the reflect occurs, for a total of up to about 14,000 damage, assuming that you're not standing too close to people and causing the red bomb to hit you for higher than 2,000 damage. Because of the damage range on the blue bombs, however, this can also only hit you for about 8,000 damage total, assuming that all of the blue bombs miss and hit towards the lower end of their ranges. Even if we assume a worst-case scenario for every single blue bomb, the total damage of 14,000 is relatively insignificant when we consider that if we're using, for example, Augmented Virtus, or if we've brewed up over max ahead of time, really we only need to use a Rocktail and a brew at some point during our attack rotation to prevent ourselves from dying, because there's really no need to go into Phase 4 with any particular amount of HP. If for any reason the team is not able to get it before the reflect, we'll get off and we can do our shield switch and use Preparation. We'll have to eat through the first blue bomb after the reflect, but this will give us the ability to resonance the second one, and like I said at the beginning of the video, the base tank is likely to be walking it at this point, allowing your team to do extra damage to finish off the phase without doing another purple bomb cycle. So now let's take a look at Phase 4. Keep in mind as we get started that it's fine to come into Phase 4 with any amount of HP or adrenaline. These are the attack rotations on Phase 4, courtesy of the RuneScape wiki, and as you can see they're different every week. However, the first half of the phase is going to be the same on any week, so let's take a look at what's going to happen there first. The very first thing will be for Virago to charge his fiery explosion attack thing, so like everybody else we're going to need to find and get behind the waterfall. Make sure you let your friends run out of the waterfall before you step out to make sure that you get the first blue bomb. The very first thing is a set of 3 blue bombs. If we have low HP we can resonance any of the 3 of them, or we can use Reflect to block some of that damage. After the 3rd blue bomb, Virago spawns a stone clone for someone in the arena, and there are a few things that we can do about this. The first is we can provoke Virago to prevent him from actually giving us a clone because the person who holds Virago's aggression doesn't get a stone clone. The second choice, and what I prefer, is to use Anticipation just before it spawns, and if we get a clone, we'll use Devotion and swap to our dual wield and quickly kill it with either Wild Magic or Asphyxiate. This allows us to extend the Devotion timer, which helps it to block more of the stream of blues that's going to come after the clone. After the stone clone is spawned, there are a series of 7 attacks, and it's common practice for the base tank to not be in melee distance on Phase 4, so you can expect all 7 of these to be blue bombs directed at you. Whether you got a stone clone or not, now's an optimal time to use Devotion, and also Preparation to bring your resonance off cooldown more quickly. This will give you the opportunity to resonance the 6th or the 7th bomb in the series, even if you used resonance coming out of the waterfall. Keep in mind, if it's Team Split week, you can't resonance the 7th bomb because the Team Split will cancel your defensive abilities before the bomb actually hits you. After the 7th blue bomb, Virago does his weekly special. On Ceilings Week, Virago does a standard ceiling fall after that stream of blue bombs, and I usually like to barricade a little bit early to block some of the damage from those blue bombs. That barricade can also protect us so we can clear the fallen rock, and then we'll want to get back into melee distance with Virago as soon as possible because there's instantly bleeds after. Standard practice here is to take 3 and 4 like usual, and then there's only going to be a set of 3 blue bombs before Virago does the reflect, and then 3 more blue bombs before the waterfall, and we start that whole cycle all over again. These other blues can be dealt with debilitate or reflect as we see necessary, and we should also have resonance available. The weekly special on Scopulus Week is just a red bomb. Whenever our devotion runs out in the stream of 7 blues, we'll want to barricade. We know the base tank won't be in melee distance, so the attack following the red bomb will be a blue, so we want to 2-step it. After the red and the blue that we 2-stepped, there will be 3 more blues that we're just going to tank and then bleeds. We can use Soul Split and Dual Wield during this period of time to heal, and since we're the bomb tank, we're going to take bleed 3 and 4 just like we did on Phase 2. After bleeds, there's a set of 3 blues, and we'll want to debilitate for those. We may also have resonance back off cooldown at this point, and if that's the case, then we'll want to do that before we do debilitate. After the 3rd blue, Virago will reflect, and we'll also want to reflect to mitigate the damage from the blues that come following the reflect. After 3 more blues, Virago will start the waterfall special attack and begin his attack rotation for a second time. On the Vitalis week, after the 7 blue bombs that Virago throws in his stream, he fires a Vitalis orb. It's common practice for the bomb tank to assist in blocking the orbs on Phase 4, unlike on Phase 3. Because of that, during the stream of 7 blues, we should make our way to the northeast corner. Ideally, we want to participate in blocking the orb without dropping any blue bombs on our teammate. If the orb is fired to the east or to the north, that means that we should stand in one space from the eastern or northern wall, respectively. If it's fired to the northeast, we can step in 2 from the north and 2 from the east. We also have Barricade available at this point to block both the damage that we'll take from the Vitalis orb and the blues that come after it. After the Vitalis orb, Virago throws 3 blue bombs and then he starts his bleeds. The first 2 go to the base tank like usual, then we'll want to melee distance. We will take bleed 3 and 4 like usual, the top bluer takes bleed 5, and then Virago will use 3 attacks, then his reflect, 3 more attacks, and then he starts back at the waterfall. On the green bomb week, after that stream of 7 blues, Virago fires a green bomb. Normally after the green bomb, Virago would fire 5 blue bombs before moving on to the bleeds, but it's become common practice on Phase 4 specifically for someone to just tank the 10,000 damage from the green bomb, which causes Virago to skip those extra blue bombs and move directly to the bleeds. Obviously just tanking this 10k hit as the bomb tank if the green happens to be on us would be very unpleasant, and a few strategies have been adapted to sort this kind of thing out. One common thing teams do is to have a person on Ancient Magics to intercept and barricade the person. Unlike when a green bomb normally targets the player, if a person is intercepting a player who gets hit with the green bomb, the defensive cancelling ability isn't passed along that intercept, so the damage is completely blocked. Another strategy is to have a person on your team take it off of you, similar to the way that they might have on Phase 3, and simply tank the damage on the second bounce. We can also simply tank it as the bomb tank, but we'll definitely want to have a Phoenix necklace if that's our choice, and HP boosting armor like Augmented Tier 80 would be advisable for such a scenario. In any case, after we've dealt with the green bomb, Virago's going to do the bleeds, and it's common practice for us to take bleed 3 and 4 like we have done throughout the fight. After the bleeds, he does his standard 3 blue bombs, then reflect, and 3 blue bombs before starting the entire cycle over again, and we can deal with those with either using reflect or debilitate. On Team Split week, Virago's going to start a Team Split right as the 7th blue bomb is going to hit. Remember that this cancels defensive ability, so don't try to resonance that 7th blue bomb. Find and get into your Team Split, and after the Team Split, Virago fires off 3 blue bombs. We will have resonance available for one of them. This should give us a chance to heal up back towards full HP. After the 3rd blue, Virago's going to do bleed, so we'll want to get melee distance. We'll use our runes on Virago. We're going to take 3-4 like always. After our bleed rotation, there will be 3 more blues, and then a reflect, and then 3 more blues after that before he starts back at the waterfall, so we can do pretty much whatever with reflect or debilitate to mitigate the damage from those. On the purple bomb week, after this stream of 7 blues, Virago does a rotation of the end special attack just like he did on Phase 3. Again, this is a great opportunity to soul split and heal back up from any damage you might have taken earlier, and since this is not a DPS oriented phase, we're actually not going to worry about escaping from the arms on Phase 4. Instead, when we get to the final quadrant where the actual purple bomb is, we as the bomb tank are going to tag the purple bomb right around the time that Virago closes his arms on that last quadrant. This changes the order of the bombs and allows Barricade to protect us from more damage. In this case, Barricade will fully protect us from all of the bombs from the VN special as well as some of the blues he throws out afterward. The red bomb will clear our Barricade, and shortly after the end special is released, he fires a second red bomb, and we can actually resonance from the non-homing blue here to heal back from any damage we might have taken. This should leave us towards max HP, which is good because the red bomb will cancel our defensive abilities, and we'll have to tank damage from a couple of blue bombs shortly after. After that, Virago does the reflect, and we may have to tank a couple of bombs during the reflect before getting back to the waterfall special and starting the cycle all over again. Whatever the weekly special happens to be, this cycle will repeat until Virago has done the waterfall attack for a 3rd time, at which point the weapon piece is freed and we're actually able to kill him. The team is likely to kill Virago very quickly out of that 3rd waterfall, so have 100% adrenaline ahead of time as we'll need that going into Phase 5. This phase of the fight is where the bomb tank's job becomes most important, and it also has lots of really interesting mechanics and certainly serves as a suitable climax for the Virago fight. To very briefly summarize the way the mechanics work on this part of the fight, any damage that Virago deals against the team, with the exception of a few types of his special attack damage, are going to push him and the team toward the west end of the arena. Damage that the team deals to Virago counterbalances this and pushes Virago and the team toward the east side. In my opinion, this tug-of-war mechanic is one of the most interesting mechanics in any boss encounter, and it really puts a lot of emphasis on the bomb tank and how effectively they can mitigate damage from Virago's blue bombs. It's common practice on this phase for the bomb tank to stand all the way north and as far back from Virago as possible, here circled in red, whereas everyone else on the team is going to be on the south wall, and as close to Virago as possible while still staying outside of melee distance. That way, the bomb tank won't share any splash damage from the bombs with the DPS. Because of this pushback mechanic, how we block damage as a bomb tank is often much more important than the amount of damage that we're able to deal, since there is an invisible scaling factor as to the damage that's dealt to us depending on the team size. One unfortunate confounding factor is that this mechanic is actually really difficult to test, and so there are a few things that we know for certain, but there's a lot that we're not quite certain about. Barricade, for example, blocks most sources of pushback. Blue bombs dealt against a player using Barricade offer no pushback, and most of the damage from special attacks, such as the damage incurred by the Vitalis Orb, are blocked by the Barricade as well. This won't necessarily block all of the pushback from special attacks. For example, the Vitalis Orb has an automatic 1 square of pushback, and all of the extra damage dealt is in addition to that. However, this is the most effective ability we have for dealing with pushback damage, and so all of our strategies are going to revolve around using Barricade. Debilitate is the other ability that certainly reduces pushback damage, though the effect is much less significant than using Barricade. We will employ this toward the second half of each of Virago's attack rotations. There are a plethora of damage reduction effects such as Prayer, the Arcane Spirit Shield, the Anticipation 10% reduction effect, as well as debuffs that many players believe are effective in reducing the amount of pushback, but because of the way the mechanic works, it's often difficult to say one way or the other. Testing the mechanic tends to lead people to believe that there are two sides to the pushback mechanic. One, a simple flat amount of pushback dealt by each of the different types of attacks, and a second amount of pushback that's added in addition to that based on how much damage was dealt by each of those abilities. If that is indeed the case, each of these reductions will contribute in a small way to the amount of pushback, but they're so negligible that, like I said, it's tough to even say if they work at all. With that in mind, you're still likely to employ most of these. You'll be praying simply to reduce the damage that you take anyway, and you'll be using Anticipation on the Reflect to help build adrenaline. You'll also likely be using the Vulnerability debuff just to increase the amount of damage that Virago takes, which does contribute to pushing him towards the east wall, so there's really no reason not to combine that with the other debuffs since you can use these on Reflect anyway. Other abilities such as Devotion, Reflect, and Resonance definitely do not reduce pushback, and so avoid using Reflect and Devotion as much as possible unless they're used as a last resort to conserve food because you're having difficulty with supply usage. For the same reason, you want to use Resonance only during the Reflect when you're not able to DPS Virago so that you get the best possible push during the periods where you can. Now let's take a look at Virago's actual attack rotations on Phase 5. Luckily, these weeks are all very similar, and so you should be able to remember what's coming for any particular week after just a few attempts. The very first thing on drop-down will be whatever weekly special is applied to Phase 5. On the Ceilings and TeamSplit week, that's a Team Split. On Scopulus and Purple Bomb, that's a Purple Bomb. On the Green Bomb week, that's a Green Bomb. And on Vitalis week, he shoots a Vitalis Orb, unless the team is too far towards the west wall, in which case he fires a Red Bomb instead. After the weekly special, Virago fires some Blue Bombs. On the weeks with Purple Bomb or Green Bomb specials, that's 5 Blue Bombs, and on the other weeks it's 3 Blue Bombs, and then he does the Reflect. During the Reflect he fires 3 more Blue Bombs, and then he does Bleeds, although unlike previously in the fight, instead of doing 5 Bleeds, he does 3 Bleeds, and they're essentially randomized between any player on the team. It's impossible to provoke Virago on this phase, and so there's no way to prevent the bleeds from being random, and so every player is responsible for keeping track of their debuff bar and clearing their bleeds as necessary. After the bleeds, he fires 3 Blue Bombs, and then he repeats the whole cycle indefinitely until the players have pushed him all the way toward the east wall and mauled him, or until he pushes the team all the way back to the west wall and instant kills them. Just as a top-level view of the strategy here, this first group of Blue Bombs is where we're generally going to barricade. The next set of blues after the Reflect is likely to be partially blocked by our barricade if we have turtling on our shield, and we can use one of the remaining blues that isn't blocked to heal back using Resonance, as well as reduce the damage from them slightly as we're building Adren towards 100% anyway by using abilities like Anticipation. This gives us the opportunity to stun Adren on the bleeds and use all of our high damaging thresholds without needing to use our shield. We can even block the damage from the 3 blues following the bleeds with Debilitate, which also doesn't require us to use our shield. Here's another look at the strategy as applied to a full rotation of Virago's attacks. An average-sized team should be able to push Virago all the way to the east wall and finish the kill before a single cycle is through, which is good because if the cycle is allowed to repeat, you won't have Barricade available to use to block the first session of blue bombs the second time around. Small teams circumvent this by having two different people swap each rotation as bomb tank so that they can use the same ability rotation every time. If you didn't plan to have a bomb tank switch but the team wasn't able to finish Virago on a single cycle, you'll simply have to improvise for the next cycle. You won't have any of the good damage reduction abilities available, so using a combination of Anticipation and Devotion during this first portion of blue bombs might be a good choice. This should of course be a very rare occurrence. If the team was still not able to finish Virago on the second cycle, you could resume doing this strategy for the third cycle and every second cycle thereafter. Now let's briefly talk about our strategy for dealing with the bleeds on Phase 5. In my experience, this is the thing that most new bomb tanks struggle most with, and because the bleed damage contributes to pushback, dealing with these poorly can really jeopardize the smoothness of the phase. Unlike elsewhere in the fight, because Virago's stationary on this phase, instead of being a certain distance from Virago in order to clear a bleed, you have to be a certain distance from the spot on which you actually acquired that bleed. This can occasionally be problematic for the bomb tank because if you acquire the bleed at the spot that you're normally standing on sometime when Virago is relatively toward the west wall, you often won't have space to either side of you in order to clear that bleed if your freedom's on cooldown from clearing a previous bleed or from errantly using it for adrenaline stalling. Because of that, the most common strategy is for the bomb tank to run roughly into melee distance and toward the center of the arena when Virago starts the bleeds. There are no blue bombs thrown during the bleed, so it's okay for the bomb tank to be within splash distance of the DPS. One common mistake here is not stepping towards the middle of the arena when you run in, and this can be a serious problem because if you're standing all the way on the north wall when you run in toward melee distance and you try to use Escape, Escape will try and path you at a diagonal, and since there's a wall directly behind you, simply won't do anything, and you won't clear the bleed. With all that in mind, assuming worst case scenario where you take all three bleeds as the bomb tank, your first would be cleared with Freedom, your second would be cleared with Escape, and then for the third you'd simply have to run back in, or if you want to take it to the next level you can bring a melee weapon switch to use Barge so that you can clear it on tick as well. This is especially important if you're attempting duo kills, but for larger teams is not really important. In a 4 or 5 man team for example, the chance that you're going to receive all three bleeds as the bomb tank is extremely low. So let's take a look at an example of this Phase 5 rotation in action. Regardless of the weekly special, you'll always have time to get a Wild Magic and 2 basics off to build back to 100% in order to cade before that first blue bomb hits, so that's what we're going to do. Because Barricade's a non-damaging ability, we can also slip in an auto attack, so if you brought debuffs, now's the opportune time to use Vulnerability simply by spamming that while you're using Barricade. From here, our main goal is to build as much adrenaline as possible. After the 5th blue, we're going to get off for the Reflect and continue building up with some of our passive defensive abilities like Anticipation, Preparation, and we can use Resonance to heal back from one of those blue bombs. After the 3rd blue bomb has been thrown from within the Reflect, Virago's going to start the bleed, so we're going to run into roughly melee distance like we discussed earlier, and we'll do our Sun Adren rotation. Here we just need to continue to build and deal with bleeds as necessary, get up to Wild Magic and Asphyxiate, and make sure that we have the adrenaline to debilitate once the bleeds are finished. Even when we run back out to bomb tank distance, we can make sure that we stay inside the radius of our Sunshine to keep doing DPS during the last 3 blue bombs before the cycle repeats. The last rotation I want to talk about works pretty much specifically on Green Bomb Week, but it's a great strategy for doing speed kills. If you're trying to attempt this, make sure you coordinate it with your team ahead of time, but everyone should be standing inside melee distance of Virago on dropdown, and you as bomb tank will stand one space outside of melee distance and everybody will onslaught. Each time Virago is pushed back, it stalls his attack rotation slightly, so it's pretty common to do this and not receive a single blue bomb for the entire push. As long as you've coordinated it with your team, this is probably the smoothest and the fastest way to get kills on Green Bomb Week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this video is ridiculously long, but bomb tanking is a complex role, and to really give you guys all of the information that you need to get really good at it, I didn't really have any choice but to make it long. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comment section down below. I try to answer absolutely everything I get from you guys, hopefully to clear up some extra information or maybe things that I might have left out of the video. Once again, thank you all so much for making it through this ridiculously long video, and I'll see you in the next one.